We've reviewed Sanderson's Laws of Magic, now it's time to rank magic systems. I decided to take anything I've dedicated a video to, plan to dedicate a video to, or mention in my yearly ranking videos. So it's a lot. As for anything written by Sanderson, just kidding. But actually, since we've been looking at his Laws of Magics, I'm reserving the S tier for stories that I feel like execute the 3 Laws of Magic well. And P is piss poor. Let me know in the comments what your favorite magic systems are.
So third time I recorded this, let's hope it works this time. Quick review, the 3 laws. The first is, if the reader understands the magic, you can use it to solve conflict. Second one is, limitations are way more interesting than powers. And the third one is, dig deep. So the first up is the Villain's Duology by V.E. Schwab. I loved this series, and I think that the magic is really well done. We understand it when it's used to solve conflict. We dig deep into the world. Magic is kind of a new thing, and so they're still learning, and we get that whole experience. And then finally, limitations. We definitely get a focus on what the different characters' powers are, but they also have to find their limitations, and that's really interesting. Next up is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I think this magic system was really well done. We understand it to a very deep degree. We understand what works and what doesn't work. We understand the limitations of it, and it's very deeply embedded into the world. I think that Yumi and the Nightmare Painter has an S-tier magic system. The Wizard's Handbook to Medieval England, or whatever the title is, I have a different opinion about. And this is kind of fun because these are Sanderson's laws, and I think that it's C-tier. I didn't really follow what was going on most of the time, at least when it came to magic. And so when magic is used to solve conflict at the end, it didn't have much meaning to me at all. You know what? Oh, we're doing it. We're going to piss poor. Oh, starting out hot. Okay, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. I only read book 1 and 2 of this series. I haven't read any of the spin-offs or anything else. It's a soft magic, at least in those first 2 books. It doesn't really use magic to solve conflict for the most part. I do think, though, that the magic is a little bit too soft, meaning the reader just doesn't have a clue about anything magic related, really. And so when it shows up, it's kind of interesting, but at the same time, it just doesn't have really much weight to it. And for a story like that, I feel like things need to have weight to them in this world, and magic just didn't have much weight to it for me. So I'm going to go with B tier. Next up is The Death of the Black Widow. The magic in this is like a girl can kiss people dead. And it's like barely urban fantasy. I think it's just not, definitely they did not dig deep. We understand enough to understand the conflict resolution, and really I don't think magic really is part of the conflict resolution. Limitations, I don't know. The vibe of this Black Widow girl is supposed to be kind of mysterious, deadly, but sexy, and I don't know. It was all right. I'm going to go C tier with it. You tried. Good job. You tried. Next up is Monster Hunter International. I have issues with the magic system. So let's just talk urban fantasy, because we're going to see this again. So urban fantasy has this issue that it always brings in like every mythology possible. And so it leaves a big opening for us to have just like anything could happen. And so if anything can happen, it often cuts the tension when bad stuff happens, because we know anything good could happen. Your main character could suddenly be OP, and that's exactly what happens. So I think, even though I feel like the magic and like the world of Monster Hunter International is really well developed, I just think that the magic system is too open, and we're not given all of the pieces that we need before we get to the climax, or before we get to the conflict resolution in general. Next up is The Poppy War. The Poppy War is another one that I only read the first book. I couldn't get through the second book, not even like a few chapters. But the magic system was pretty solid. I felt like the whole time you understood what was going on. You've got a little bit of soft and chaos that causes problems, which is great, but you also have some pretty solid, like, hard aspects to it where you do understand exactly what the characters need to do in order to use magic and what the characters can do. And I thought it was really well done. The balance is great. The limitations are set, and also kind of the lack of limitations in some case ends up being pretty chaotic and causes a lot of problems. So I think that the magic system was done really well. S tier for Poppy War. So Foundryside is interesting. I thought the magic system was really awesome in the first book. In the second book, I felt like it started to fall apart a little bit. It started to feel a little bit like the characters are really smart, so they can come up with any idea they want, and it will work because they'll figure it out. And so even though we had really good parameters built around this magic system, things started to kind of expand too much, and we ended up having kind of the similar issue to urban fantasy where suddenly anything can happen as long as your brain thinks of it. And because all of our characters are just amazingly smart and they have all these amazing ideas, because plot, they can think of stuff. And so great, no tension. I think we're going to go with B tier on this one. I'm not a serial killer, so this actually, magic system wise, has similar vibes to The Death of the Black Widow, where there's just like one character that has some magic systems, that has some magic. It doesn't feel very deep in the world. So I read 2 of the books now, and it is a little bit deeper than in the first book, but it's still not getting deep enough for me. However, I think it's really well done that even at the end of the first one, you get this sense that there is more and the character is going to come in contact with more magic. So I'm going to give it A tier. Definitely has some room for improvement, but it's pretty solid. Okay, Fate of the Fallen. So there are some things that I love about the magic system in this book that actually intrigue me to pick it back up, even though I only read the first one. My big issue with the magic system, how it went down, was that suddenly at the end, a main character that we spent a ton of time with now has magic, and they use it to solve conflict. Character can do whatever he wants now. We didn't get the clear limitations, and it was definitely a focus on sudden powers and not a focus on limitations. I think I'm going to go with B tier on this one. Mistborn is like the gold standard of magic systems, at least in my personal opinion. Everything about it is so solid. The reader's understanding of it is amazing. The limitations are clearly set and well developed into the characters in the world, and just the magic system itself is so much a part of the enjoyment of this world that it just is S tier. It is the gold standard. And let's follow that up with Stormlight Archive, because I know that I might be making some enemies right now. I think the Stormlight Archive has some room for improvement when it comes to magic system. My big issue is that it's pretty complicated. I think there's 10 different types of magic, and within those types of magic, there's like 3 or 4 levels, and then there's overlapping. So like this one order of night can have 2 different types of magic, something like that. And then add to it, I don't feel like Brandon Sanderson does like he did with Mistborn, where like every page he was reminding us how the magic system worked. There were very often times where they would say one of the Order of the Knights as if I was supposed to understand who those people were, what kind of magic they had, which characters had that magic. I just couldn't keep up with it. I kind of glazed over the final battle in book 4, mainly because I'm losing track of what these characters can do, and so it just cuts the tension, because I know that I can get through this battle and I'll have the aftermath laid out for me. The Magicians is really interesting. It's very much soft magic. It's another urban fantasy one, so kind of anything goes. But what I love about the Magicians is that we hardly ever use magic to solve conflict. Really, the majority of the conflict is internal for Quentin, and magic does not solve it. And when magic does solve different issues and different conflicts, it always brings up more problems, with maybe like a few exceptions. Those exceptions happen so rarely that I feel like it's not a big deal. So I'm going with S tier, our first soft magic system popping up into S tier. All right, so we've got Warbreaker. I'm probably going to put it in A tier with Way of Kings, just for my lack of remembering it. Inside the story, it works really well. It's very satisfying when they solve conflict with it. You understand the limitations of the characters that can use magic, and it is built deep into the lore of the world. I just don't remember it that well. Elantris is going to be A tier for a different reason, I think. My big reason is that all the characters can suddenly use magic in the finale. Not all the characters, but I'm like totally spoiling it. Okay, spoiler alert for Elantris, but we spent a lot of time learning the magic system, which is great, but then all of a sudden when the climax is going on, that's when the character suddenly can use magic to its full abilities, and we don't know their full abilities, which means we also don't know their full limitations. And then you throw in that, I don't remember the guy's name, but he could do like karate dance steps or something and became magical from that. It just kind of seemed out of left field. It wasn't set up very well. And so it just brought up a lot of questions and kind of took me out of the climax. So I'm going to go with A tier on this magic system. Who would have thought that Brandon Sanderson would only have one in S tier so far? All right, next up is Wheel of Time. So I have some complaints about Wheel of Time. Even though I think that the magic system is relatively well set up, like we know the limitations of this magic system, at least on Rand's side, very well. I don't know about the women's side as much. I felt like it still had more space to explore. However, it has a big issue, especially in some of the earlier books. I only made it to book 4. Yeah, book 4 is the last one I read. But almost every book ends with a huge battle between Rand and the Dark Lord, Beelzebub, devil, evil guy, whatever. And there's just no understanding of what the evil guy can do. Rand is able to do stuff out of absolutely nowhere. Those battles did nothing for me. In fact, I feel like I got the most frustrated reading those books during the climax. And people are telling me, oh, just wait till you get to the final battle in book like 300, and it's so worth it. And I'm already saying every climax so far has been trash. So definitely making some people mad. So I'm going to go with B tier here, just because the conflict resolution was trash. Promise of Blood, I did not enjoy this book. I felt like I have no idea what happened in it. Don't remember anything about it. I read it last year. Hasn't been that long. And I just remember that like you could snort gunpowder and get magic. And I don't remember anybody actually using magic. So I'm not the greatest judge of how good this magic system is, except like I have absolutely no recollection of anybody using it. So we're going with P tier because it was not memorable. Next up is, what is that? Dark Shade of Magic, the Shades of Magic series. So Shades of Magic is it's not urban fantasy per se, but it definitely has those vibes where kind of anything goes. In the first 2 books, I feel like there's enough parameters that when magic is used to solve conflict, it's not a big deal and it just works. I would say the 3rd book, the villain just gains power and just kind of seems like they're OP. And then you know that the characters are going to come up with some OP-er way to defeat them. So for me, it cut the tension. It was just dragging on for too long. And so I quit reading the 3rd book. I'm going to put it in B tier because of that tension cutting. I loved this world though. I was really sad. I tried to not quit it. All right, Jade City. I love these books. So it's hard magic. You have to understand it. I mean, if they're going to use it to solve conflict, there's kind of 2 interesting things going on. One, when they do use it to solve conflict, it's still usually rather satisfying, despite the fact that I feel like the details of the magic system are really glazed over. And then just so much of the conflict is political. The magic isn't necessarily used all the time to settle these political conflicts. I think if they were using magic to settle conflict, I would definitely put it relatively low. But because most of the conflict is solved in other ways, ways. I think this one deserves A tier. I love this world. The magic is really well integrated into this world. You see several different nations and how they react to magic, and it's just great. All right, next up is The Witcher. So The Witcher is interesting because yes, there is magic, and we get scenes where we kind of were learning magic, but it's a lot more about the character and the relationships going on in those scenes, and magic is almost like a background. And then you have The Witcher, who is magic himself, like is a mutated being, I guess you could say. There's a lot of soft elements to The Witcher, but they don't come into play in solving conflict, except for the fact that Geralt solves conflict. So technically magic solves conflict. It's a little awkward to explain, but I'm going to go with A tier because like it's almost always satisfying. There are a few times where magic comes into play in the resolution of conflict, but it usually solves more problems. And even I think in the Witcher show, I don't remember this in the books, but they call it chaos. And it works. It causes chaos all the time. Oh, Lightbringer. I'm only on book 2. I still have more to read. My big issue with Lightbringer is that I cannot explain the magic system at all. And they use it to solve conflict. So even though it's satisfying when I read the books, I feel dissatisfied later because, for example, as I'm trying to make a YouTube video, I can't even say what the magic system is, except that it's colorful. The like limitations that individual characters have is very well set up, and I could probably tell you that. However, I cannot tell you what like this color does and cannot do. And it's extremely well integrated in the world, so I'm going to go with A tier. Next up is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is definitely soft magic. Like I said, it suffers from urban fantasy syndrome where anything is possible. I think, though, that J.K. Rowling does a good job of setting us up with the magic that we will need to understand for the current book that we're reading, and even has some hard magic elements, for example, with wand lore. For example, with wand lore. I think that as soft magic and urban fantasy anything goes, I think she does a great job with it. So I'm going to go with a S tier. So The Beyonders is next. The Beyonders is an interesting book. It's like a portal fantasy, kind of similar to Narnia, where kids go to a magic world. There are some super interesting like creatures in this world. I'm saying creatures, but it's like fantasy races, species, whatever. They were super, super creative, and I super enjoyed that. However, my big issue is that kind of the gimmick of this novel is that the characters are trying to learn this magic word that has been split up and separated, and if they say this magic word to like the Dark Lord is supposed to die or lose his power or something like that, and they spend the whole book doing that and find out that, oh, spoiler alert, they find out that the magic word doesn't work. Is it that the magic word, like that whole thing, was just a lie, or is there a different magic word? That kind of plot resolution, conflict resolution really didn't work for me. It's fine as part of a plot, but to have that be the end of the first book, and I just am not motivated to read book 2 because now I'm like what even is what are the rules here? How are these characters gonna overcome things? It just feels like they're just going to. So I'm going to go with C tier. A little bit sad to put in C tier because I loved those fantasy races. All right, next up is the Dresden Files. The Dresden Files definitely suffers from urban fantasy syndrome as well. Anything goes, like I said. I think why Dresden is going to go a little bit lower than like Harry Potter, for example, even though their magic systems are extremely similar, is that Harry Dresden is more knowledgeable and more powerful than Harry Potter really is, as Harry Potter's still a student. And we don't really get a clear understanding of what Dresden can and can't do. I'm like over halfway through the currently written series, and I feel like he just comes up with new things all the time, which is great. Like, you have to be growing, but I don't know his limitations. And so we get into a climax and I'm just like, hand wavy him. It's going to work out. Not always, but it definitely can cut the tension. I'm going to go with A tier. Actually, I'm teetering on B tier because it has issues with the conflict resolution and with the limitations. Yeah, I'm going with B tier on magic system. I want to dig deeper. I want to know more. All right, Sunlit Man. Sunlit Man is a secret project. Hasn't been out for very long. I read it recently, and I don't really remember what the magic system even was. I'm not going to put it on C tier. The magic was used well to solve conflict. I do remember that, but I don't really remember too much about it. When it comes to Cosmere magic, you know that it's not going to be absolutely trash, you know? So I'm going to go with B tier. Just kind of gut feelings, I guess. All right. Game of Thrones. I've only read the first book and I've seen like a season and a half. It's soft, at least in the first book, it's still soft. And it's used so much to just create chaos when it is used in the books. I'm definitely not going to S tier because I just don't feel like we have enough of an understanding of it to have any idea of limitations or even really to see it deep into the world. I think I'm gonna go with B tier. Stardust Thief. So Stardust Thief is soft-ish. I feel like it's maybe trying to be hard, but just like, so there's these moments in the book where something will happen and the reader doesn't understand it, and then like after the fact they'll explain it and it just comes off like really unsatisfying. You're like, okay, now I get it, but no tension. So I'm going to go with B tier on this one too, because it was a satisfying book and I think it did a mostly good job at using magic to solve conflict, and like we understood what was going on most of the time, but I remember several times where they just kind of explained things after the fact. I didn't love that. Okay, Babel. Not my favorite book, but the magic system was definitely S tier. We understand everything. It's hard magic and they explain it really well. It's used super well to solve conflict. The limitations and the abilities are very well set up, and there's plenty of focus on what is possible and what is not possible. It's built into the world really well. I enjoyed it a ton. The magic system. Next up is a Master of Djinn. Again, it's an urban fantasy. It's like a 1920s or something urban fantasy, or maybe earlier than that. I don't remember. I say that it does suffer some from urban fantasy-ness. It's mostly contained in like Egypt mythology. You don't get the feeling that like the Olympian gods could show up out of nowhere, but I think I'm going to go with A tier just because it was a little bit more contained. I didn't love the climax conflict resolution, but that was like the only time I had a complaint about the conflict resolution. I'm not 100% sure if that was even like magic's fault. So the Lies of Lamora has an issue for me that it doesn't feel like it really goes deep into the magic and into like the lore of the world. Part of that is that none of the characters can do magic, which is fine, but it does cut our understanding of the conflicts a bit because they're battling, like they have conflicts with magicians, and so I felt like there were a few issues with like our understanding of the magic and what was going on. I'm gonna go again with B tier. Ooh, Tress of the Emerald Sea. Actually, I'm gonna save that one for last. Let's do Lord of the Rings first. Lord of the Rings is soft magic, but it is used so well. Yes, sometimes it is used to solve conflict, but the majority of the time it also causes problems while it's solving the conflict, which is like the perfect way to use soft magic to solve conflict. There's like a few exceptions to that, like for example the eagles, but it's very obvious that we got to use the eagle, or that we can't use the eagles until Sauron is dead, because Sauron would just, hey, there's an eagle trying to bring troops in. I think it's super well used soft magic. Nothing else to say. It's Lord of the Rings, like it's S tier. It's the father of fantasy, or mother, I don't know, the parent of fantasy. All right, finally, Tress of the Emerald Sea. I saved it for last because I'm kind of conflicted about it. So Tress of the Emerald Sea has the Tress of the Emerald Sea magic system. It also has Cosmere going on. So I'm going to judge it separately. So Tress of the Emerald Sea magic system, it's very well explained. When it's used for conflict resolution, you get it. It's satisfying. It's great. There's good limitations to the magic system, and it's very deep into culture, and it's just deep into this world. S tier. Now let's talk about Cosmere. I've already rated all the Cosmere things that showed up in Tress. However, I have an issue with Tress that you bring an Elantrian into the series, or you bring somebody from Mistborn in, like you bring all these characters in that have different abilities, and we, the reader, now has to go back to our understanding of a previous series in order to understand what's going on. that just doesn't work. I mean, it works, but it's not S tier. It's just not S tier at all, because we have to understand within the book what's going on. And if I have to go back and reread Elantris to understand what the Elantrian in this book is doing, that's not S tier magic system. That's like B tier. So I think, honestly, the Cosmere stuff, it was not well explained. And some of it was important for conflict resolution. Not all of it, but some of it was. And the climax conflict resolution definitely required Cosmere knowledge. The limitations and the abilities of said Cosmere characters were not set up. And so the Cosmere characters, the Cosmere magic systems, I feel like there wasn't really deep exploration into how those like magic systems also being in this world could affect this world. So I'm going to say that Cosmere portion of this book gets C tier magic system, if that makes any sense. But Tress, like I said, gets S. Thank you guys for watching. I have a feeling that you guys disagree with some of the things I said, so hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think, and other Kevin, take it away.
If you've enjoyed this series so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'm working on a video where I take the 3 laws of magic and I build a magic system from scratch. You guys are gonna love it. If you enjoyed this video, check out my end of the year rankings.